Michele Romanow is a serial entrepreneur who started 6 companies before her 35th birthday. A dragon on CBC's hit show Dragon's Den, Michele is the co-founder and CEO of Canadian unicorn Clearco. It has invested more than $3.2 billion into more than 7,000 companies, making them the largest e-commerce investor in the world. So impressive. Welcome, Michele.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, so I kind of went through this quickly, but let's start at the top of my introduction. You started 6 companies before your 35th birthday. Let's talk about the first one. How did that begin?
Oh my goodness. So I'm an undergrad, I'm in engineering. I figure out I'm going to be much better at building businesses than building bridges. And I found a great, co-founder who was my classmate at the time. And we started playing the game, what's the next $1 million idea? And we literally dreamed up everything from like the impossible to the possible until finally settling on caviar and fish farming, which everyone should laugh at because that's the strangest thing, 3 20-year-olds could have come up with. But we figured out worldwide supply was down by 95% because the world had overfished the Caspian Sea. We started cold calling restaurants and chefs would pick up the phone being like, do you have this product? And we're like, no. And so we ended up writing a business plan, winning some business plan competition money, which was my first seed money for the first 5 years of my career. And the most important part, Amber, was having the guts to say, we're not going to take a job offer after university. And instead, we just moved to the East Coast, very close to where you're from. We moved to New Brunswick and built a fishery from scratch, which is everything it sounds like: boats, fishermen, my hands knee deep in fish, the whole 9 yards. And it was actually a great little business until the 2008 recession, where I found myself being 22 years old, selling the world's most unnecessary luxury product. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me where I realized the world really doesn't owe me anything. And I was going to have to keep iterating if I wanted to survive. But that's how I originally got started.
So let's talk a little bit about the fact that throughout all of these businesses, you've been really good at identifying change happening in the world and adapting to those changes. I'm sure you've done a lot of that over the past couple of years. So how did you learn that skill? Because it truly is a skill as an entrepreneur.
So I think adapting to change is like a risk muscle you have to get, better and better at. And I know there was a question later on, what is one of your greatest failures? I think it is our failures that give us the ability to adapt to change. So the first thing in this career is you never have a normal day. I still say to this day, and I've been doing this job for 15 years, that twice a week something blows up and it's going to totally destroy my day, my timeline. You're going to have to be reactive. You're not going to be proactive. And that's part of this job. It's a very big thing. I mean, that could mean getting on an airplane the same day when you woke up in your home in one morning and you might need to be in a different city. That means completely clearing your calendar. That means trying to save an employee who maybe want to leave. Like, that is kind of the life of an entrepreneur, is you have to deal with this enormous amount of change and uncertainty. And then you have to look at the market and where the market is heading and say, okay, now I need to adapt. Because I would say that most of the biggest things that have happened in the last decade, you didn't have a lot of warning. I mean, I remember thinking we had 3 days of warning before COVID started. Like, some things you have a long lead time, but many things you have to react very, very, very quickly to.
You know, a simple way to describe what you've gone through is that you obviously have lots of grit. You know, it's a word we hear about all the time in the business world. But I'm curious, where do you think that grit for you comes from?
Grit is the most important trait. And I would say that not describing myself, I would saying that as, an investor and as a dragon, like, it's the number one thing that I look for, is that this is a job where if you were a boxer, you're getting in that ring every single day. And we all have a plan until we're punched in the face. And every single day you got to get up there with your black eye and be like, I'm going to do this again. And that is really what grit is as much as you see these pitches on Dragon's Den and you're like, okay, it's a great market, great pricing strategy, great marketing. You have to remember that all of those founders are going to see that business model change like 4 times in the next 24 months. And so are they going to be the people that are going to be ready to take that punch and say, okay, I can pivot. Okay, I can move to the next thing. So then where does grit come from is the core of your question. And I've tried to figure this out over a lot of different places. I've identified a couple places. The first place it comes from is absolute necessity. I think that especially when folks are poor and they want to build a better life for them and their family, they're like, I'm going to do whatever it takes. And I have seen that time and time and again be one of the places that grit comes from. I have seen it come from competitive personality types where it's like, I just don't want to lose. I hate losing. I will do everything to prevent losing. And there's this competitive nature about it that can create this personality trait with a huge amount of grit. I typically see more grit in people that have had harder childhoods versus easier childhoods. If you have kind of been given many things in your life, it's harder for you to develop this later unless you're super competitive and you really, really want to build something on your own. And the final part of your question is absolutely anyone can become more gritty and more perseverant. This is something that you limit on yourself. I'm sure you're born with a natural inclination or a natural bit of it in you. But if you've created that goal and that destination in mind, I think that there is absolutely nothing preventing you from doing that. I mean, for me, sometimes I just have this line in my head where I'm like, Michele, this is a totally solvable problem. And this is not the one you're going to be taken down by. And so that's like the line I repeat in my head. I'm like, oh, okay, so we have a hiring gap. Okay, I can solve a hiring gap. Like I take the problems and I'm like, is this really what you want to destroy you? And every once in a while, there is a problem that is truly insurmountable. But I would say those are so far and few in between. That's like the entire world turning around and not needing your product anymore. A competitor coming in that's so aggressive and so much better than what you can do. It is like a pivot is uncontrollable. Like those are the types of things I would look for.
You know, it's interesting as you're talking because I'm hearing you in terms of embracing failure and learning from failure. At the same time, I know that you hate losing. And I think a lot of business leaders who are watching today, that definitely resonates with them. So I'm curious, you know, thinking about your role as an investor, both on Dragon's Den and investing in businesses over the past few years, what advice do you have for our audience today in terms of how you have that fight to win, but also the smarts to know when you're failing that it's time to step away?
Amber, this is the single hardest question I get asked. And it is, when do you know when to pivot your business? And I don't have a perfect litmus, but I will give you a couple of of the gut check tests I keep in mind. So the first thing is, when you do this, you've always done it too late. As a founder, you always tend to love your ideas. They're a little bit of your own baby and your own child. And so it's always too late when you do this. But the first thing you should be looking for is, am I getting a reaction? So let me describe the reaction you're looking for. So have you ever been on a website where you just, I don't know, find a great pair of blue boots, and you're on the website and you type in your credit card number and you really want to buy these things, and it's you press confirm, and it's not working, and you're like, oh my god, you know your credit card again, you type it in again, you confirm, and it's not working, and you're 3 times in, and you're like, why won't you just take my money website after all? That is the experience you want people to have with your product, that they would fight to sit there, even if there's typos on your website, even if something is not perfect, that they would really, really want that. And that, I think, to me, is how I best define product market fit, is the market is pulling for your product and just makes so much sense. Sometimes products are hard to explain. Like at Clearco, I would actually say we have a harder product to explain. And so it takes a couple of minutes, or it takes 5 minutes for people to explain what we're doing. But after that point, you have to be looking for that pull that you have. The second thing you need to do is you need to be exceptionally honest with yourself. And you don't ever need to do this to the external world. You need to do this with probably you and your co-founders or your couple core team members, where you have to say, are these really the unit economics we have for a business to scale? And I mean, the unit economics are, are we selling a basket size of $100 with $25 product costs and $25 marketing, so we're making a $50 margin? And this is where so many founders make mistakes, is they're like, okay, well, the first 2 years, we're just going to spend all of our customer acquisition dollars today. And unless you have a truly rebuild SaaS product with incredibly low churn, those businesses always end in tears. And anyone can polish numbers. I have learned this over the years. If you want to put together something for an investor, you can always make something look a little bit shinier. But you, in your heart of heart, have to know if these are really impressive enough unit economics to scale. And what you want to be giving yourself is at least a 20% buffer as things start to change. I mean, we've seen inflation of goods this year go absolutely crazy. So if you don't have that buffer, you're in a really tough place. And maybe the final story I'll tell you on this is these are hard decisions you have to make truly, largely by yourself or with your co-founders or with your really core executive team. So we were 2.5 years into founding ClearBank. It was ClearBank at the time, now ClearCo. We started by believing that we could build a bank for entrepreneurs and founders. And the biggest segment of the market that was growing was all of these independent contractors, so Uber drivers and Airbnb hosts. We did our first product for Uber drivers. That didn't work. Our second product we did where we were funding Airbnb hosts to expand their property portfolios. And this was not a small experiment. We had put more than $30 million out into the market to fund these property hosts and managers. And to the point that we had raised our entire Series A. So we had raised, almost $13 million on the idea that we were going to finance Airbnb hosts. So we closed the Series A in April. And by our June board meeting, Andrew and I can see that we're having data integrity issues, we're having unit economics issues. And you have to imagine, we've just had all these investors that have put in new money. And we have this little e-commerce experiment that's running on the side where we're saying, look, instead of giving up equity in your business to grow, why don't you come to ClearCo? We'll give you, I don't know, between $10,000 all the way up to $10 million. And instead of giving us a portion of your company that we would keep forever, we don't do that. We just say we want a portion of your revenue until you pay us back our capital plus 6%. We don't have personal guarantees. That was our original pitch to e-commerce founders. And this product was just starting to work. And we could see it in the data that it was just starting to work. And so Amber, we went to our board meeting and said, we want to pivot the whole company to go from Airbnb into e-commerce. And our board basically unanimously said, don't do it. So you have to imagine this. I have just raised this money. I now have a board for the first time, and they have just told me that the single largest strategic decision that I want to make, that I know is the right one to make, or I'm pretty sure they have said no to. So Andrew and I walk out of the board meeting. We were like, okay, we respectfully disagree. We pivoted the whole company to e-commerce. We kept one person on Airbnb. We figured that we would ask for forgiveness later if they got really angry, but we would make Q4 a huge success. And I would say that's probably the largest single decision that made us a unicorn, is choosing to do that. And so this is how hard these decisions are. They are very unobvious. They're only obvious if you have all the information and you have dug yourself to find the information. And honestly, there's not a lot of other people, and I have a huge amount of respect for my board, that can make the decision for you because you are the one that has all the data. And so those are the two things you're looking for. The blue boots test, would someone, type in their credit card 4 times and be very frustrated with your website to do something? And second, when you honestly look at all of the numbers in a really sobering place, is this something you think can scale?
It's interesting too, I've watched as you have adapted over the past few years and pivoted to what's happening in the economy. And I think that's a lot of the things that businesses struggle with today is figuring out how to adapt to new digital technologies, how to keep up with a changing world that we're in right now. So what advice do you have for the entrepreneurs watching in terms of what's happening today in 2022? How quickly do business owners need to adapt to new digital ways of doing business?
Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to figure out if digitizing your business is right or not. I've met lots of good founders that can run great cash flow businesses that don't have to digitize. I do think that digitizing can make your life so much easier because, at ClearCo, we believe like no founder wakes up in the morning believing that they can't wait to fundraise. So we want to make that process easier so they can spend their time building their products, marketing those products, and everything else that comes with that. And in the same way, I think that it's one of the reasons that Intuit products are so great because no one wakes up in the morning being like, oh, I can't wait to do my accounting. I've never heard any founder say that. And so what digitizing allows you to do is make better use of your time, which makes a huge difference in the long term.
And it's interesting too, just as you're talking about really following your heart, and as a founder, best. I'm sure there are people who you do listen to in terms of their advice. Is there any one person who you call when you're in a jam and you need to talk through an issue that you're facing? Who would that person be?
Yeah, I mean, I have my co-founders, I have a few couple of advisors that are other entrepreneurs that I've met over the years. I also look and read a lot of the stories of other founders. So I think it's important that you develop a certain network of other founders, because the problem is if you're not close with other founders, especially in the early stages, you'll have an idea and you'll go ask your smart lawyer friend and your smart accountant friend and your smart doctor friend. And all of those people will identify the actual challenges with your business. And the worst problem is that they're right. But what you do to be successful as a founder is not just risk minimization. It's actually, beyond that, it's figuring out what are the couple of things that you can do to really move the needle, because you can't win by risk minimization. You just have to close that big deal or that big hire or whatever you're looking for. And so that's been really helpful. And then I read the stories of other founders all the time, whether it's like, the Chip Wilson book of how he built Lululemon, or it's the story of how Apple was built or how Nike was built. As soon as you read those stories, you realize that, any single one of these businesses could have gone bankrupt at almost any point in their history.
You're exactly right. And I think it's interesting because so many people who are watching today look to you for advice on how to thrive in the business world. They follow you on Instagram, they read content you put out there on social. So when you are going to read a newsletter or listen to a podcast, do you have any recommendations in terms of some of those sources that really inspire you on a regular basis?
I think that I've tried to like curate my own feeds on like what I want to see. I don't have any specific newsletters that I follow. I do follow TechCrunch and what people are building in tech companies. I follow, who's raising early stage money for what types of ideas. I find that those are very, very helpful to go after. And then I find, having a network of founders to rely on has been the most useful thing for me there.
When you think about your role as a founder, what is the most rewarding part? Recognizing that there are a lot of challenges, but what is that piece that makes it worthwhile every single day?
I mean, this is a job where you get to have an enormous amount of impact if you want to change something. I actually think it's the fastest way of changing anything in the world. And I know that sounds lofty, but I believe that to be true. I look at, if you were to work at an NGO or in a government, it's a very long process to make change happen. And, I look at the impact that entrepreneurs can have. The biggest impact on greenhouse gases has been building cars and trucks that are electric, that people want to drive. That was a founder, was the Nest thermostat, which was a founder. And central governments have invested so much money into doing that. And so I think that when you empower founders, we're allowed to move the needle on the things that we care about. We really get to build the world that you believe in and that you want to live in. And then I think the last extremely rewarding part is you get to build your own team. When you go to work for a company, you are stuck in a team and you have to get along with those people. When you build your own company, you get to choose. You want to work with the accountant you like and the lawyer you like and hire the people you like. And like never doubt a small group of people to change the world. It's the only thing that ever has.
So when you think about your legacy, and I realize you're very young for me to be asking that question, but what impact do you think that you have had to date in terms of the businesses that you've built?
I think about impact in terms of like, can I build a better world for founders? I think so far, the fact that we've been able to invest $3.5 billion in 7,000 different founders, like that's mind blowing to me. I remember when 500 startups felt like a huge number. A lot of people said this idea was going to be a joke, that maybe we would deploy 20 or $30 million. And now at 3.2 billion, like the entire US venture capital industry deploys $23 billion a year. Like I'm a piece of the pie on the graph, which is crazy to me. So I think about 7,000 founders is great, but how do I impact 1 million founders, and how do we continue to grow, which has been a huge part of why we went international last year. I made a lot of mistakes doing it, but it was 100% the right thing to do. And so I'm still learning and growing as a founder, and having that impact so that if people have a great business and great metrics, they should be able to build their business and find capital to do that.
So I want to ask you what's next, but I recognize that you're still in the thick of things in terms of building your business today. But what's on the horizon? What are some of those other goals that you want to be able to achieve?
Yeah, I think right now it's really about how to scale ClearCo. I haven't actually thought beyond that because I'm now in the thicket of how do we get from, startup into scale up and do that globally around the world. And so, that's continued to growing our core product. That's continued to build internationally, and that's all the new product development we've had. I'm returning this season for my 8th season of Dragon's Den, which will be really fun to see this new chapter of businesses. And then I'm thinking about how to use my giving to continue the causes that I care about.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was great to be here. Thank you for having me.